Today's session really will be about, can sociology be value free? Is it actually possible that sociologists can be neutral and objective in their research? And more importantly, should they be? I mean, there's a big debate about this, as we're going to see, where the positivists on the one hand very clearly believe that we should be value free, and that means keeping our opinions, our ideas, our bias out of our research. And then got the interpretivists and others who say actually, it actually isn't possible. To some extent, we shouldn't really worry about it. Natural scientists are clearly interested in the idea that science itself should be detached and objective, that, research itself involves the keeping out of subjective values from research. And that's possible. We have the image of the scientist in the white coat being able to have a very clinical environment with control variables, and their own perceptions, ideas, belief, prejudices don't affect the research at all. And we saw that when we looked at sociology and science. But all people have values. We all have prejudices, we all have beliefs, and we have opinions about what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. I mean, take the idea that, if the proposal is that you're to work on developing a policy or find evidence to support genocide, at some point there's a moral question to be asked there, and it's very difficult for human beings to keep their values out of research. And our values are influenced by many things, including our class background, our gender, ethnicity, socialisation and life experiences. All of these things will play a part in the values that make up who we are. But the big question is, can sociologists keep their values out of their research? Can we be value free? Is it possible to stop contaminating the research process with bias? Or will it always be destined to distort the work that we do? Well, sociologists are divided on this very issue. Some claim that it is possible, it is desirable to keep subjective values out of research, and that can be done, particularly from the positivistic camp. But some argue that because sociologists are humans, because we are the same thing that we're studying, unlike a physicist, exploring the kind of things that they do, looking at magnetism or forces, we're dealing with humans. And because we're dealing with the same matter that we ourselves are, it's impossible to keep our values out of that research. And then there are some that say it's actually, not that it's impossible, but it's desirable for sociologists to use their values to improve society. And this is known as committed sociology, committed to making a difference. So what are the classic sociologists' views on this? What are the classic views? Well, the early positivists, such as Comte and Durkheim from a functionist perspective, they shared the idea of the Enlightenment. They did see sociology as a scientific pursuit of the truth. They did want to find the answers. They did want to improve society. And they did believe that if we followed the ways of the natural sciences, then we could keep subjective values out of research. Sociologists could produce facts that could improve society. And in fact, Comte went as far as to say that sociology was the queen of all sciences. Marx himself, in his study of historical materialism, believed that, we could actually reveal the facts of how societies work and how to improve them. He was very keen to reveal the truth about how society develops over time, and he did believe that from his findings, a communist society, an ideal society, was possible. And therefore the key thing was to analyse historical processes and show us again a kind of enlightenment, a modernist view, how to improve and how to achieve the good society. Well, for Marx, Durkheim and Comte, there is no distinction at all between the facts as revealed by science and the values we should hold. Science could tell us what these should be. Now Weber, he does make a distinction between value judgments and facts. He argues that we cannot derive one from the other. Now, for example, if we look at values and facts, research, for example, might highlight the fact that divorces are more likely to commit, divorcees and people from divorces are more likely to commit suicide, it doesn't logically demonstrate the truth of the value judgment that we should make divorces harder to obtain. The fact does not make us accept the value. It may well be that we should make it harder to get married, or maybe we should support suicide, a completely different value. Basically what Weber's getting at is that facts and values are different things. So what does Weber say about the role of values? Particularly what does he say about the role of values in research? And he says, there are 4 stages of the research process, and each of these we need to think about the role of values. First of all, values as a guide to research, in terms of choice of topic. Social reality is made up of an infinity, a meaningless infinity of facts. It's impossible to study all of it, so we have to make selections, we have to make choices. But how do we do that? Weber argues we can only pick those in terms of our own values, of what we ourselves value, what we find relevant. And he calls this value relevance. Our values affect which aspects of reality that we choose to study, and the concepts that we develop and understand this world will be shaped by our values too. If you look at feminism and gender equality, they study women's oppression, and they develop concepts like patriarchy to help them understand it. That is their focus. If I was an anti-racist sociologist, and I would be exploring racism and inequality and how to achieve equality, how to get, basically how to improve society to get around that, that would be a concern to me. He also notes that during data collection and hypothesis testing we find values. We've got to be objective as far as possible. When we're actually collecting the facts, we must not ask leading questions, we must not produce tools that will distort our findings. This is where objectivity is vital. Because once we've got the facts, we can use them to test the hypothesis. And our values must stay out of that process at all costs, they must not be there. Weber also says we've got to be careful when we're interpreting data. It's very easy to look at findings through a particular lens. It's very simple and very easy to make the problem of distorting what we see and being selective in what we see. And he says that the facts need to be set in a theoretical framework so we can understand their significance and draw conclusions. We need to be explicit about our values here so others can see if unconscious bias is present in our interpretation of data. So this is where we need to put our hand up and say, look, this is where I'm coming from theoretically. This is what I found out, this is my interpretation, but this is where I come from. And that's vital. It's vital because in terms of values, we can spot any bias that's there. We're mindful of that. A researcher that doesn't accept values and sets about what they do without acknowledging that, he's been untrue to the project really. Also, we need to look at the fact that, values and society. We're going to look at, the sociologist as a citizen. And very clearly, our findings will affect people's lives. We've got to think about the impact of that. Weber says we must be mindful of this and not act like clinical, detached beings. Look what happens when you take knowledge and you apply that in systems to the lives of people without taking account of humanity in people. The obvious example being Nazi Germany, where scientific principles were applied in a process of genocide. There is always going to be morality, there are moral obligations and political implications of what sociologists find. We therefore cannot hide behind words like objectivity and value freedom. It's at this stage where we have to bring values into what we're doing. We have to make choices. Look at the humanitarian system example. And the US military developed a program which was basically used with study groups in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were using techniques developed by anthropologists to gather information about the cultures and the lifestyle of the people that were there, and they used this in their military decision making. They used this to help win the hearts and minds of the populations. As Kilcullen called it, armed social work. And the American government in 2007 actually sent a team of social scientists to each of 26 US combat brigades, costing $400,000 for social scientists per year. At the end of the day, there's a point where we've got to ask ourselves how our research is being used, how our discipline is being applied, and how our findings can be used by governments, in the case here of the Americans, and trying to win, as I said, the hearts and minds of the people in the Middle East. But overall, for Weber, values are relevant in research, but we must avoid them when gathering data, and at least acknowledging their existence in the rest of the process. This brings us to the issue of value, freedom and commitment. There's a big debate of whether values should exist in the research process. Whilst a lot of modern positivists are of the opinion that value commitments should be avoided in research, others, Marxists, feminists and interactionists, have argued for what could be termed a committed sociology. Lots of debate. If you think about committed sociology, when we look at the view from modern positivists, we actually find sociology and value freedom is essential. They argue that values are irrelevant to research because at the end of the day, they want to be scientific. They have a desire to be scientific, and to be scientific means identifying facts, discovering the truth and being neutral. And it's not for sociologists to condemn or praise with their findings. We're just to act like clinical conduits, bringing our findings to the population. And then there's the social position of sociology. Gould said in the 1950s we reached a situation where we actually did become spiritless technicians. We lost our critical nature, and we no longer were challenging accepted authority. We were basically part of the system. We were no longer problem makers. We actually were problem takers. We were guns for hire, taking on research projects for governments, for businesses, and leaving our values out of our research, making a gentleman's promise that we would not rock the boat. But the viewpoint from committed sociologists is different, as can be argued by the likes of Merdell. Values are important and should be present in sociological research. It should not only spell out our values, but we should openly take sides by promoting the values and interests of particular individuals or groups. To that end, sociology cannot and should not be value-free. We hear from Gould again arguing that value-free sociology is both impossible and undesirable. By impossible, what Gould is saying, that as a sociologist's own values, or those of their paymasters, will be bound up and reflecting the work that they do. It's impossible for that not to happen. And also it's undesirable because without values to guide research, sociologists are merely selling their services to the highest bidder. And we can see the way that sociologists have been used many times by market research companies to help sell their products, even though we're mindful of the link towards cancers and lung disease. Howard Becker goes a little bit further. If sociology is influenced by values, at the end of the day, it must need to take sides at some point. If not, the sociologist is in fact just taking the side of the powerful. And this is what Becker refers to when he talks about the overdogs and the underdogs. He asks the question, whose side are we on? And claims that these values are always present in sociology. And traditional sociology has tended to support the overdogs. But we should take the side of the underdog. The criminal, the mental patient, the less powerful, because their voice isn't known. Now, if we think about where Becker's coming from as an interpretivist sociologist, trying to get under the skin, trying to get to the meanings and the perceptions and looking at the interactions between people on a micro level, it's these voices that don't always get heard. The mainstream voices, the voices that are out there in wider society, are normally those peddled by the larger institutions and are there by socialisation or conditioning, depends what stance you want to take. But it is the voices of the underdogs that don't get heard. There is a hidden reality there, and we need to reveal this hidden reality. This is something which Goffman clearly argued about when looking at work with the mental patient and taking their side against the psychiatrists who look at the career of the mental patient in asylum. And sociology, therefore, should always be adopting qualitative methods such as PO unstructured interviews, which reveal the experiences and meanings of these outsiders. This is precisely what we found in Becker's work, Outsiders. But Gulner comes back, and Gulner's quite critical of Becker. Gulner says that Becker takes this romantic view, this view of the exotic, be it the Chicago marijuana smoking jazz musicians, wherever it may be, these disadvantaged groups, these groups on the outside. Becker is concerned only with those who are on their backs. And Gulner, from this Marxist perspective, is quite critical that we're getting a bit of navel-gazing from the interpretivists. You know, the very thing that's mainly aimed at labelling theory, that they look at the exotic, they look at the weird, they look at the marginal extremes. They don't look at the everyday lives of everyday people. Gulner feels that sociology should take the side of those who are fighting back, which therefore means we're getting into the issue of political struggle. It's not just for, I said a moment ago, navel-gazing or defending the underdog or looking at the world through their eyes, just purely for voyeuristic pleasure, but it is a committed struggle. Sociology is part of a struggle to end the oppression and unmasking the ways that the powerful keep power in society. So we've got this idea of committed sociology as a political commitment from a Marxist standpoint, with a view to highlighting the way society is and how to change society. But there are some other considerations to think about as well in the value freedom debate. We've got funding in careers. Who actually fund sociological research? If it's funded by somebody, will they not dictate the form, the focus, the presentation of the data, the spin that should take within this? We look at source of funding from government departments and businesses and lots of organisations. They control the direction of research, they control the questions it asks, and at the end of the day the research will embody the values and interests of the paid masters. But those funding the research as well may prevent publication of findings that they don't like. The sociologists' own personal values can also come into this. And sociologists in their lives may also wish to further their careers and reputations. That may well influence their choice of topic, the questions, the methods and how they interpret their findings. And we find so many cases of young sociologists taking on much more radical stances, be it the Howard Parker view from the boys, with his work into juvenile delinquency in Liverpool. Those sort of more radical approaches could be taken. But sociologists may also censor their findings. If their findings may harm their career prospects, some may fear losing their jobs, they may fear losing their credibility. That will affect their work. They're human beings. And like most of us, are instrumental in calculating. And in universities where there's pressure to publish research, much of the time, regardless of quality, regardless of usefulness, purely because there is funding which the university is receiving and that research needs to be out there. Theoretically as well, value freedom. We can't deny the fact that your perspective carries within it many assumptions and values about how society is or how society should be. If you look at feminism, with its focus on gender inequality and the need to promote women's rights, that's going to have a major impact on the research approach they take, and we see this shift. I've been wave of thinking about using much more interpretivistic approaches and taking a much more interpretivistic stance with feminist research to get under the skin of patriarchy, see the world through the eyes of women and, again, take a standpoint, committed view. Functionalism, well, it sees society as harmonious. It's very keen to promote conservative values and the status quo, maybe undermine revolutionary ideas, undermine radical ideas and go for a much more traditional standpoint. And Marxists will see conflict. They will see conflict and they will highlight disharmony. They'll highlight tensions in their research and emphasise. They won't just find the cracks in society, they'll start to smash those cracks wider open with their research in this aim to bring about tension and to bring about a classless society. So there's lots for us to think about there with regards to Marxism, feminism and functionalism. But these assumptions will influence the topics they choose to study, the concepts that they develop and the conclusions they reach. You know, feminists are going to want to basically focus upon the tensions surrounding patriarchy within the family, within the workplace, but they may not find themselves being too focused on developmental sociology or world sociology. And there's very clearly a link between methods and the value stance of sociologists. We know full well about the difference between structural and social action approaches, the qualitative and quantitative divide, the issues surrounding objectivity and subjectivity. But at the end of the day, you know, we can't deny that there is a link, that there is a choice being made, that there is a value stance there. And I use the case of interactions here, preferring qualitative data in their goal to understand the world of the underdog, because it gets them to the meanings and the world view of those that are being studied. Which brings us to the question about objectivity. Can we be objective? Are there absolutes? Are there facts out there? Well, if all sociology involves values, then these findings just reflect their values rather than the true picture of society. And this therefore takes us towards relativism rather than absolutism. Different groups have different views of what is true. There is no independent way, therefore, of judging their value. It's a bit like the postmodernist agenda at meta-narratives. All sociologists would agree with the first statement. But relativism does go further, and it does argue that there is no absolute or objective truth anymore. We have truth plural. And therefore, there's no way of judging which truth is right or not. What is the objective measure that we can go for? To take the view from postmodernists of expanding the idea of meta-narratives, clearly all knowledge is based on values, and assumptions therefore have no special claim to be true. If that is true, and this also includes postmodernism, you know, we shouldn't believe anything. Nothing out there is objective. It is all riddled with values, and it's all distorted, and it's all contaminated. Hence, this links back to the enlightenment and pursuit of the truth. How can we? In practice, sociologists do not go as far as postmodernists. There is a real factual world out there. We can't deny poverty. If anybody's watching the TV programme Skint at the moment, you will see the depths of poverty facing members of our community and the real lives that they experience, whether it's access to their children, whether it's losing benefits and the impact of putting food on the table. There is a real world out there with real life situations. And regardless of our values, we can observe these facts. Once facts are established, you can make judgments on the value of different theories. Do we live in a true meritocracy? Do all minorities have less chance of leaving school with qualifications? Beyond the question of values, in theories, maybe we need to focus more on how well a theory can explain the world, rather than wrapping ourselves up in the question about values. Maybe if a theory can stand up and it makes a strong explanation, then we roll with it. And this may well be getting into the realm of real-time and language games. But enough about postmodernism. Examination questions may well look like this. Assess the view that values can and should be kept out of research. So again, with that, we take two positions. Can it? Is it possible? The next question, which ties ourselves up with committed sociology, is should it be kept out of research? Two parts to it. Again, evaluate the claim sociology can and should be value-free. And then pretty similar questions. Anyway, enough said about that one. The next session I'll be doing with you will be all about social policy and the relationship to sociology.